Have you ever felt like someone was watching you even when you were completely alone? Like a presence standing just outside your vision that disappears the moment you turn your head? Most people dismiss that feeling as imagination, but what if one day you realized the shadow following you everywhere wasn't actually yours? This is the story of a man named Ethan and the shadow that slowly began behaving in ways that made reality feel uncertain. Ethan lived a quiet, predictable life. He worked a regular office job, lived alone in a small apartment, and followed the same routine every day. Wake up, go to work, return home, eat dinner, watch something online, and sleep. Nothing strange ever happened in his life, until one night while walking home under a streetlight he noticed something that didn't make sense. His shadow stretched across the sidewalk like it always did, but when Ethan suddenly stopped walking, the shadow moved just a little further forward as if it had taken one extra step after he had already stopped. When he looked again, it was perfectly normal, so he ignored it and blamed his tired eyes. But the next night he noticed something even stranger. As he walked under another streetlight, he briefly saw two shadows on the ground. One matching his body exactly and another slightly taller one that seemed a little delayed in movement. When he turned around expecting someone behind him, the street was completely empty. Over the next few days, small strange moments kept happening. One evening while brushing his teeth, Ethan noticed in the mirror that the light behind him cast his shadow clearly on the wall. When he raised his hand, the shadow followed, but a fraction of a second later than his real movement. The delay was tiny, but once he noticed it, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Later that night while lying in bed, he saw the hallway light casting his shadow onto the opposite wall. When he moved slightly under the blanket, the shadow didn't move at first. It stayed still for a moment before slowly adjusting as if it had just realized it needed to follow him. Ethan sat up instantly, and the shadow snapped back into place. The next day at work, Ethan noticed his reflection in a glass wall in the hallway. Everything looked normal until he realized the shadow stretching across the floor seemed to turn its head slightly even though Ethan himself hadn't moved. When he quickly looked around, his coworkers walked past normally as if nothing unusual had happened. That night Ethan decided to test it. He stood in his living room with a lamp behind him casting a shadow on the wall and started recording with his phone. He waved his arms, jumped once, and moved around while watching the shadow carefully. Everything looked completely normal, and the shadow copied every movement perfectly. Relieved, Ethan stopped recording. But when he lowered his phone and looked at the wall again, his heart dropped. The shadow was still moving slowly, raising its arm even though Ethan's arms were completely still at his sides. When he stepped back in fear, the shadow instantly snapped back into position. Shaking, Ethan replayed the video, and near the end after he had stopped moving, the shadow twitched once in a small unnatural movement, like something inside it had tried to move on its own. The following evening Ethan walked home again and stopped under the same streetlight where everything first started. He raised his hand slowly and watched the shadow copy him. But when he lowered his hand, the shadow stayed raised for 2 full seconds before slowly lowering itself. Fear rushed through Ethan as he whispered quietly asking what it was. In that moment, the shadow's head tilted slightly even though Ethan had not moved at all. He ran home, locked the door, and turned on every light in the apartment. Shadows scattered across the walls, but one shadow behind him stood out clearly. When Ethan slowly turned toward it, the shadow moved first, taking a small step forward like it was trying to separate itself from his body. Then the lights flickered, and when they stabilized again, the shadow looked perfectly normal. From that night on, Ethan avoided shadows whenever possible. He walked during the day, avoided dim lighting, and never looked behind him when passing under streetlights. But sometimes late at night while sitting quietly in his apartment, he can still feel something standing silently behind him. And every once in a while when he catches his shadow in the corner of his eye, it looks just a little bit taller than he remembers. If this story gave you chills, like this video, subscribe for more dark and mysterious stories, and comment below what you would do if your shadow suddenly started moving on its own. And tonight, When you walk past a bright light and see your shadow on the ground, take a second look. Because sometimes the shadow following you might not actually be yours.